Welcome to the dojo. Today we're going to take some fan-made 3D models and make them into Final Fantasy VII inspired minis for your tabletop games or at Final Fantasy homebrew campaign or your desk or for fun. You probably recognize the Cloud and Chocobo. These are low-poly fan-made sculpts I found on Thingiverse. But the Shinra soldiers are actually reskinned sci-fi gunners by Duncan Shadow Luca. You can get them for free on his Gumroad. I'll put the link down below. If you want to get creative, you can always try and create your own FF-inspired characters and reskins using Desktop Hero 3D, like I showed you in my last video. After downloading the model, scale it down to your preferred scale. Most common scale for tabletop gaming is 25 to 28 millimeters to fit on a 1-inch base. I import a mini into my slicer that I know is already scaled to 28 millimeters and resize it to be about the same size. Make sure that the mini will fit on a 1-inch base and that the scale isn't too wonky. For folks who want to be precise, I've included a link to a free 28mm height checker in the description below. I recommend printing these models without a base to help your slicer generate good supports. I use Cura's new supports with no other support selected for each of these. As you will see later, in the case of Cloud, I had to reprint it because I had a failed print. Now we slice, export, and print. Let's remove the supports and clean it up. At this size, you have to be careful about what you're pulling because yanking a support too hard can break your entire mini. My recommendation is to really identify what you're yanking with the pliers and spin before yanking. This will give you an idea of what will move before you keep pulling on the supports, and this tends to work best with zigzag supports that are connected. I also use Cura's tree supports, which are similar to Mesh Mixer. These tree supports are kind of like peeling a fruit with lots and lots and lots of layers. When something breaks off, you can usually glue it back. In some cases, there's just too much broken or it looks too ugly, in which case I will reprint it, like I did with Cloud. If a broken or detached piece has a super flat surface with lots of surface area, I use super glue. If something small like a leg or arm breaks off, I use this stuff. I usually just dab it in. I push against it a couple of times to harden it, let it cure, and usually within the hour, it's solid. If there's any ring around it, I'll cut it off with an X-Acto knife like molding. You may have noticed I lost a few more feathers than I would have liked for the Chocobo. I decided not to reprint it because overall most are intact, and I would say this Chocobo was injured, right? Just, it's okay. Or something like that. Time to prime. I use $1 black matte primer from Walmart. Works like a charm on PLA. For Cloud, I used a Zenithal priming because I'm trying to learn how to use Zenithal priming. Instead of cleaning this stuff up with a heat gun, I usually clean it up with an X-Acto knife after I've primed it, especially if you have weak areas like feathers or Cloud's hair or the hilt of his Buster Sword. The primer gives it some thickness that lets me cut off those wisps with an X-Acto a lot easier, and it looks a lot cleaner in my opinion. The heat gun does work for minor stringing. This is just my preference, and I don't recommend doing this if you are trying to get rid of support marks. If your mini is relatively support mark free, like these are, then I would say this works. Painting. After laying down a base coat and a highlight, I apply a wash to fill in some of the crevices and highlight some of the details. With low poly models like Cloud and Chocobo, washes will work differently since there's less detail and less crevices. I did not apply a wash to the Chocobo. These were my inspirations for the soldiers and the Chocobo. This concept art was obviously where the Cloud model I found on Thingiverse was sculpted from, so I stuck with the same paint scheme. Basing. I used a few different bases that were also 3D printed. I left Cloud on a plain base since I wanted the focus to be on him and not his base. For our soldiers, I printed a sci-fi base from Dutch Mogul's design collection to reflect the Midgar city floor. I wanted an earthy forest grassland feel for our Chocobo, so I added some sand and rock, then covered it with a 50-50 mixture of PVA glue and some water. When it dried, I primed it black and painted it brown. I dry brushed some of the rocks gray, and I added some flocking. Then I glued my little birdie to the base. At this point, I used an old brush, gave it some green color, and then made some tall grass like you would normally find a chocobo near. After cutting off the bristles of the old brush, you just stick them in dabs of hot glue and then glue the dab to the base. I kind of liked the clear dab, so I did not paint that hot glue dab. This was the tallest I could do, but still felt kind of jisally. I probably pronounced that wrong. And that's it. If Cloud can make an appearance in Super Smash Bros., which I'm so excited is coming to the Switch, he can appear in your tabletop game or desk as well. If I can do this, you can definitely do it too. Make it happen, fellow geeks. If you enjoyed this video and would like to see more videos like it, please subscribe and share with other Final Fantasy fans so they can make their own little minis too. I look forward to having you in the DM dojo once again. Until next time, happy printing and happy gaming.